Alright, so in this video we're taking a look at the Runcam Split HD. So this is a HD split camera system for the DJI FPV system. The version that they sent me included the Runcam Link. I think it's the Air Unit Lite is what they're calling it, which is similar to the Caddx Vista. I believe it's all the same stuff made by DJI, so yeah, I'm not going to really get into cloning and all that kind of stuff here in this video. That's beyond the topic of the video, but mainly the first thing I want to get out of the way regarding this camera is the whole thing about latency. And I know that for those of you that are latency concerned or super concerned about latency and will never fly a camera that is 60 FPS and has high latency, well, this one has even more, so I'm pretty sure for those of you that are very sensitive to latency on the normal 60 FPS cameras, this product is not going to be for you. So you may as well just go ahead and stop watching the video at this point. This is a product that is really for a specific market, a niche market, and mainly for those that may not have any other solution other than this. In terms of latency, I normally fly my DJI cameras at 50 megabits and high quality mode all the time. I rarely ever fly low latency mode. So I am pretty much used to just flying the high latency all the time. It doesn't bother me at all. Now, going to this split system here and the way the system is designed, it adds an additional around 30 milliseconds of additional latency on top of the already existing latency. So you're up in the 60 to 70 milliseconds total latency just from the camera. And even I can feel it a little bit if you're flying very fast or doing a lot of close proximity. You definitely don't want to be using this camera. But if you're just kind of cruising around at, not too fast of a speed and not really flying close to a lot of objects, maybe kind of higher up, you're just trying to get like sort of a cinematic type of video, this is okay in my opinion. It's flyable. I didn't crash. I didn't have any run-ins with any objects because of the latency. And other than noticing it, it didn't impair me in terms of being able to fly the camera. So it is usable given the limitations if you are already aware of the latency and can fly that. If you are normally like a racer or whatever and you have to have the absolute lowest latency, this is not going to be usable. This is basically a non-starter for you guys. So again, you might as well just stop watching the video at this point. There's really no point in listening to me talk about this. Now, I'm just going to get right into who this product is going to be for. In their product advertisement at the very beginning, they showed this camera in this particular frame. This is the iFlight Chimera 3 frame. And you can see I've rebuilt it obviously with the camera in there already. Previously I had a separate camera in there. I forget which one it was. I think it was the Polar camera, I forget. But I was flying it with a naked GoPro and with the same 1303 motors, same stack, the same air unit in the back there. And it weighed about 165 grams with the GoPro, no battery. In this setup here, so it was fairly heavy. And if you go back and watch that video on this build, the flight times were kind of shorter. It was running on a 3S battery, I think it was like a 520 or something like that. And you don't really get great flight times. It doesn't, it's okay for cruising, but it's not really that agile. It just feels like you're flying a boat at this weight on a 3-inch prop. So I recommended not to build that build. So. And when I redid the whole build here, obviously I took out the existing DJI camera, and then I put the split system in here. So the way the split system works is there's obviously the camera unit, there's a DVR board, which is right here, and then you have the air unit, or in this case it's called the Air Unit Lite. And then, oh, by the way, I'll just swap out the antenna. They sent along this Link antenna. This is their Runcam antenna. It's a little bit lighter than the Caddx antenna that was on there before, so I swapped that out as well. But anyway, the system has this little DVR board, which is right here, and that basically intercepts the video that comes from the camera and sends it to the Air Unit Lite, which gets transmitted to your goggles. So The video that's recorded is up to 2.7K 60 frames per second, and then it gets downscaled to 720p, and then that 720p signal, or that video resolution and frame rate, is sent to your goggles at that lower resolution. And that's what this board does, this little DVR board. So it records it at full resolution, but then sends a downscaled, less, it has less data, so it can transmit that to your goggles, and which is, the normal DJI signal. So if you look at it in the goggles, it looks like a normal DJI camera, with one exception. This camera is able to produce a 4:3 image, and the sensor is a 4:3 aspect ratio sensor. So this is, I believe, the only 60 FPS camera with that capability. So you get a nice 4:3 image in the goggles, and you get a wider vertical field of view in this setup. And I only flew that mode because that's the only mode I think this is really going to be useful for anyone that wants to get this kind of video footage. It is a 2.7K 60 4:3, because you can run the Gyroflow application on this, and I'll get into that a little bit more later in the video, to stabilize the video footage. So it basically is like Real Steady Go, so you get the nice sort of hyper smooth Real Steady Go type of stabilized video. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit more detail a little bit later in the video. But yeah, that's the one mode that I flew. That's actually the only mode that I flew. You can go down to lower resolutions like 1080p, etc. But for this application, I don't think it's really that useful. It just, basically image quality, it gets very, very poor at that point. So you might as well just go to the maximum, 2.7K. So you get that 2.7K image, gets recorded to the SD card, and then it gets downscaled to 720p through the air unit light to your goggles. Now, one thing to note is that if you're recording video to the SD card, the latency is a little bit higher than if you're not recording video. But if you're not recording video, I don't know what's the whole point of getting the system anyway, so it's kind of besides the point. I believe they are saying it's about 5 milliseconds less latency, maybe 10 milliseconds less latency, but if you're getting this, you're recording video, because that's the whole point of the system. So, knowing that you get less latency without recording video is kind of pointless on the system, in my opinion. Now, as you can see here, it's a very tight build. You got the camera here, you got a cable that runs across the top here to the DVR unit, and I had to remove one of the heat sinks off the top of the air unit light here to get all this to fit in here. So this is about a 20 millimeter standoff here, so it's 20 millimeters between the top plate and the bottom plate, and it would not fit because I ran the cable over the top there, which goes into the back of the DVR unit. And so I had to remove that one heatsink in between the DVR unit and the air unit light. Getting this into a build is going to be challenging. So the whole point of the system is to put this on something that's very small and light, that you normally would not want to fly, like a naked GoPro or Insta360 Go2, something where you have other alternatives where you might get better video quality, and not have to worry about, you basically you're saving a little bit of weight here is the bottom line. If you talk about the camera and the DVR board by itself, it's about 20 grams. So, if you just have a system with just the camera and not the DVR board, I think the cameras, the lightest camera you can get in here is going to be the Polar Nano I think that's around 3.5, 4 grams. Yeah, so, by basically, what's the difference here? About 15.5 grams. Basically, by adding to any system about 15.5 grams of weight, you can get onboard 2.7K video recording capability with the ability to stabilize it in Gyroflow. And that is really, if that's your goal, if you're trying to save as much weight as possible, then this system is the only thing. This system is the lightest system you can get for that purpose, to get any kind of high definition video. Because the next step up would be like a naked GoPro or Insta360 Go2, and those are going to be around 27 grams. So it's like, well, If you want to save that about 10 to 12 grams, then that's the only way you want to get your system to go in terms of flying, then you may want to consider this. And that's kind of the only use case scenario for this system, in my opinion, is if that 10 to 12 grams is absolutely critical for you to get a system flying. Obviously, I'm putting this in a 3-inch, but I'm talking about even systems that are even lighter, where maybe you have a completely stripped down air unit here where you have no heat sinks, just the boards, maybe even stripping out the heat sink off of the DVR board, and you're putting in something really tiny, like a 2-inch Cinewhoop maybe, or 2-inch quad, maybe a 2-inch toothpick, maybe even something smaller, but like a 40 millimeter propeller, and where weight is absolutely critical. And that 10 to 12 grams might make the difference in terms of your flight performance. So if you have anything larger, your alternatives are going to be better for you in terms of going with a Insta360 Go 2 or a Naked GoPro. So if you're running this on a 3-inch, 4-inch, obviously anything bigger, that 10 to 12 grams is not going to make any difference at all. So now the trade-off of that for that 10 to 12 grams is you ultimately going to get lower image quality. So if you look at the footage of this, even at 2.7K 60 frames per second, the bitrate is about 60 megabits, which is okay for the resolution, but they're doing something weird in the firmware. It's almost like they're upscaling 1080p type footage to 2.7K, because once it goes through Gyroflow and you've done all the processing, even with that bitrate, it just looks like the image quality breaks down quite a bit, and it doesn't look that good. So it's a huge compromise. If you're going to go with the system, it's really because you want to save that 10 to 12 grams of weight, but you're also willing to live with the lower image quality compared to a Go 2 or a Naked GoPro, and you don't mind the extra latency, of course. So, again, this is a very limited use case scenario here. I don't think a lot of people are going to be using it because they're going to find that there's other alternatives out there that are going to be better for them. However, this does exist for those very few people that this might work for. So the last thing I want to mention is that they do include this ND16 filter. It just sticks on the top here. When you put this on, you got to make sure it's all the way on, otherwise you'll get vignetting around the edges. It might get cut off by the stabilization software, the Gyroflow. But if you don't put it all the way on, you're gonna see the edges of the ND filter in your video feed. Also, there's a little bit of lens flaring and reflections from the inside of the glass of this ND filter, and I'm not really sure if there's much you can do about that, because the glass is almost all the way to the lens, and I think is a characteristic of what the lens is doing. So sometimes at certain angles when you're flying into the sun, you get a lot of this sort of really kind of annoying lens flare reflections from the inside of the glass of the ND filter. So something else to keep in mind. It doesn't show up often, only at certain angles when you're flying. Okay, so the last thing to talk about is the Gyroflow software. They did send me a special beta version of the software. I'll upload it to my Google Drive and put a link in the description. In there is going to be a lens preset for Gyroflow for this particular camera, which you're going to need. So I'm not going to cover Gyroflow and how to use it in this video. I made a video already on how to do that. I will link that in the video description. Go down there and check out that video. Basically, I just use the lens or the camera preset that they sent, and then I will put a little some stills of the settings I used to produce the footage that you saw. It's basically the same, it's just that I think that they made a special development version for this camera and that special lens preset, because when I used the regular version that you can download from the regular site, it got some weird kind of distortions that went away when I used the updated version. So just use that, use my settings that I show here, and you should get the same results. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Let me know if you guys have any questions about this, if you think that it's this for you. Obviously, it's not going to be for everybody, and I know that. So, yeah, if you've already left your comment about oh, this is not for me, I get it. There's going to be a lot of people like that. If you're kind of wondering if it might be for you or not, and you want to probe me for some questions about that, let me know down in the comments. Give me your questions, and I can sort of guide you as to whether or not you want to go with this or perhaps an alternative solution that might be better for you. Okay, that's going to do it for this one. Talk to you later.